I gotta tell you, having been an entrepreneur for 6 years, I will not go through the rest of my life without taking smart drugs. Aniracetam, piracetam, Uridine Monophosphate, Alcar, CDP-choline. You can always have a better brain.
The Cortex Nootropics Podcast is about to begin.
Boom. Episode number 14 of the Cortex Nootropics and Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Michael Ballo. So, we're going to talk about Uridine Monophosphate. I've got probably a top 5 in nootropics. This is in the top 4, really. Aniracetam, oxiracetam, modafinil, and Uridine Monophosphate. Those are basically my top 4. And this is a compound that I started experimenting with, I want to say 4 or so years ago. Trying to find new, novel compounds and really searching for the critical compound or critical combination of nootropic compounds that really facilitated brain energy and functionality in my business, in my time as an entrepreneur. At the time, I was running an iOS device services company that I closed in late 2016, where basically we repaired iPads and iPhones for a local contingent of customers, as well as a bunch of schools and businesses that we had contracts with, in which, if they broke a device or a bunch of devices, they'd mail it into us, we'd fix it, send it back to them. And so, but that wasn't it. I mean, that doesn't really require all that much continuous brain function. It's tedious work, but I think the real work was in doing everything else for me. I wasn't just the technician. At certain points we had a couple technicians that I had hired, but most other points I was doing it all by myself. But I was the janitor, I was the marketer, I was answering the phones, I was doing the contracts, I was selling customers, I was traveling to the customers' locations. In the case of some of the bigger companies and the schools that we were doing business with, where the deals were considerable amounts of money, I had to go there and talk to them. They wanted to meet me in person. It was a legit thing. And so me having to do all those things put me in a position where my brain needed to function really, really well. And I had already been taking nootropics for probably 4 years at that point. And so, I was searching for the best compound that allowed my brain to just muscle through all of that stuff, to do it functionally, to have good verbal fluency when dealing with customers, to have a lot of good mental energy in the meantime. And Uridine Monophosphate was it. Like, there was no better compound for it. I mean, really not even modafinil, because modafinil is great, but modafinil is not like Uridine in the realm of verbal fluency. So that's where I first came across this compound. I've done a significant amount of research on it thereafter, and then ended up putting it in our commercial nootropic stack, Cortex, because again, of all the nootropics, of all the nootropic compounds that we could put in a stack that we were legally allowed to put in a stack, based on CGMP, Current Good Manufacturing Practices, and other mandates by the US FDA, we couldn't put racetams in the stack and not have legal problems. We'd have to have lawyers on retainer and venture capitalists investing in the company, because it would get expensive for selling racetams. And so Uridine was it. Uridine and a combination of that and CDP-choline, which we're gonna get to why that's so powerful a little later in the podcast. But that was essentially the basis for the Cortex stack, and it's no surprise that the stack is performing well out there. Lots of people significantly like taking the Cortex stack. It gives them similar results of brain energy, working memory, verbal fluency particularly, and just a whole lot of endurance and focus ability. And so, that is just a testament for Uridine Monophosphate. Also, lots of other folks are out there on the web talking about this compound and their responses to it. Like all nootropic compounds, not everyone responds well to everything. Some people break out in hives when they take modafinil, and some people don't really respond well to Uridine, but it's probably 15% of people that take it, and the rest of people are like, wow, this is like the wonder nootropic. It's pretty epic. So let's run through some of the basic mechanistic things happening with Uridine Monophosphate. For those of you curious about this, to give you kind of an idea of some of the functions. Number one, it aids in the synthesis of cellular membranes. It aids in the synthesis of cellular membranes. So it's a substrate, or it's like a component of phosphatidylcholine synthesis. Phosphatidylcholine is the outer structure of cell membranes, and having more of it helps your brain make those cell membranes, and that contributes to fluidity and signaling. That's important when you're sitting and having a conversation with someone. I actually think that is why the verbal fluency is so apparent when taking Uridine Monophosphate, and with the Cortex stack, because you've got this membrane fluidity that's just functioning incredibly well among neuronal functioning from the uridine monophosphate, directly contributing to the building of phosphatidylcholine. It's a theory, but it seems pretty reasonably plausible at this time. And that contributes to you being able to formulate sentences and spit your stuff out well. It also donates cytidine to the CDP choline production process. So once you take uridine, it does a bunch of different things. While it's not making phosphatidylcholine, it is donating, it's converting in some process to cytidine partially. It's called the Kennedy cycle. And then that's converting partially to cytidine 5-diphosphylcholine, which is another choline source, acetylcholine source, but it's a bioavailable acetylcholine precursor that also enhances the density of dopamine receptors, which uridine does too. So uridine is very multifactorial. We're not even done yet. First, it's a substrate in phosphatidylcholine synthesis, but then it donates cytidine to help CDP choline production, which is a necessary acetylcholine precursor and a modulator of dopamine receptors. But then also what's awesome about it is that it contributes to this thing called neurite outgrowth. So, if you study kind of basic neuroscience, or if you try to get into performance enhancement, kind of like I did, without going the route of taking neuroscience classes or going to get a neuroscience degree, then you do understand sort of basic neuronal functioning as it relates to how neurons communicate with other neurons, and they do so by sending signals from themselves to those other neurons, and those signals travel along branches, and those branches are called neurites. And there's two kinds of neurites. There's axons, and then there's dendrites. These are the connectors of the branches between neurons in your brain that allow signals to go through. So what uridine monophosphate does in an interesting way is it increases the production of those neurites. So it actually helps the neurons branch new branches of axons and dendrites to other neurons. It's incredible. This is one of the most powerful nootropics there is because of that. When we think about what we want in a nootropic compound, we want something multifactorial like this that really works toward making the brain better, obviously these are very, very small chemical reactions taking place. Right? Like you couldn't see it unless you had a microscope or electron microscope or something. But this is physical stuff happening in the brain that is facilitating the functioning of the brain. It wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that neurogenesis, which is the spawning of new neurons, could at least be facilitated in part by uridine. And there are some studies combining uridine, DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, and a choline source, which do show that together they facilitate neurogenesis. So it's this incredible multifactorial thing, and that's not even it. There's one more thing, at least, that we can discernibly figure out in the research that it does, which is that it activates its own receptors. If you take L-tyrosine or something, and then it converts to tyrosine eventually in your brain, and you I'm not sure if you've got tyrosine receptors, but most neurotransmitters go and affect a receptor site. Acetylcholine does, glutamate does, serotonin does, GABA does, and uridine affects these receptors known as P2 receptors. And what it does when it's not creating phosphatidylcholine is it actually acts as a neurotransmitter, its own neurotransmitter, uridine monophosphate, once it gets in the brain by this activation of these P2 receptors. So it's this multifactorial, multi-mechanistic nootropic compound, synergistic with fish oil, DHA particularly, B vitamins, and a choline source, also synergistic with acetyl L-carnitine in my experience, synergistic with artichoke extract in very small doses and Bacopa monnieri in my experience. That's why we put both of those in the Cortex stack. The Cortex stack is uridine, CDP choline, a bit of artichoke extract, and some Bacopa monnieri. It's one of the most well-balanced stacks there is, and it's because of all these things that uridine does in combination, with CDP choline. But it's basically just a super compound. So let's quick talk about the combination of the two of them. When we were building the Cortex stack, I tried a bunch of different things. I had 100 compounds sourced in from different countries in my living room trying to figure it out. Sampling everything. I had a bunch of beta testers. Some of them were U.S. Army soldiers, and I was just getting feedback from everybody. We were trying to find the right stack, the thing that worked for everybody. And no question about it, across the board, with the exception of that small percentage of people that just didn't respond to the uridine and or the CDP choline much at all, or it gave them negative side effects, folks reported that the uridine CDP stack with a little bit of artichoke extract and Bacopa monterey was the most powerful stack. It was the most noticeable. I had everything from, I'm finally verbally fluent. I've been verbally fluent like this in my entire adult life, to I woke up after not sleeping because I had a terrible night and I went to work and couldn't think, and I was like, oh, well, I'll try this. I guess I should try this beta testing pill that my friend Ryan gave me because he's going to build a commercial supplement out of it and see what it's like. And a half hour later, I was in my inbox, like, cranking out work, and I felt great, and I was super productive. It was more productive that day than I ever am. So that was that was the great indication of the combination between CDP choline and uridine monophosphate. And there are endless articles out there on the web that discuss the combination, basically about building new neurons and improving neuron outgrowth, improving dopamine and acetylcholine profiles, and modulating receptors and things of this nature. Doses. Let's talk about doses. The standard doses on websites like examine.com are usually always very high. They're always too high in my experience, almost invariably. And so the standard dose for uridine monophosphate, according to examine.com, is 500 to 1,000 milligrams. Now, that's a lot of uridine monophosphate. There is a company in Australia that makes a product called Suvanade that's meant to treat Alzheimer's, and it has uridine and a choline source in it, and some B vitamins and DHA. And they use uridine in pretty high concentrations. It's like 500 milligrams plus. It's at least 500 milligrams in that solution. And, many people, I guess, do take that much. But I don't think that ordinary people need that much. And I say that because our stack has less than 200 milligrams in it. Whenever I've taken uridine by itself and or just with a choline source, I've always taken less than 250 milligrams after I determined the best dose for me. And myself and everybody else that took the beta testing stack for Cortex, our stack, and then takes Cortex is totally blown away by it. And we've got it in dosages less than 200 milligrams. It's just about 175 milligrams, right around there. And so if you're looking to try uridine monophosphate, I certainly would not start at 500 to 1,000 milligrams. I was saying, like, recently on a video that the distinctions I've been making, what's been happening to me after like year 4 of taking nootropics, now I'm on year 8, but for the ensuing 4 years, was basically that I had just made I started making distinctions. I'm like, all right, less is more. Got to take B vitamins with certain nootropics. It's good to take minerals with certain nootropics to intensify the effects. All this stuff. And one of the standout identifications that I made was that less really truly is more. And you want to start at the lowest dose with everything and then work your way up, right? Because then you know exactly where you're at. If you start with 1,000 milligrams of aniracetam or something, you're like, oh, I don't know, this isn't working for me. You tend to just want to go up from there, and then if it keeps getting worse, it's because you should have started very low. I know people that take 200 milligrams of aniracetam, and they're like, whew, I'm on fire, that works the best for me. And or microdosing a couple hundred milligrams, 100 milligrams every 2 hours until, 5 p.m. or something. Throughout that entire time, they're functioning really well. So what I would say is if you're going to try uridine monophosphate by itself, totally do it. Because, try acetyluridine, which is a slightly more bioavailable version of uridine monophosphate, is sold by itself, and people use that as a nootropic standalone. And if you do, I would say shoot for 100 to 200 milligrams first and see where you're at. See how it affects you. Try not to take it with anything else because, there are interactions between uridine and other things, particularly things that work on dopamine, like L-tyrosine. So I would just take it by itself and see where you're at, and then kind of titrate your way up or down to see. I know people that can only take 75 milligrams of it. It's too strong for them. 100 or 200 milligrams and they get brain fog. That's when you're probably just cranking up acetylcholine too high. The effects are too pronounced. Your brain's trying to regulate it and it throws everything off. The 75 is like perfect for them. So you're going to want to kind of dose wisely on that and find out where the heck you're at with it. The status of uridine monophosphate in the United States of America is that it is on the generally recognized as safe list. So you could buy uridine monophosphate basically at any nootropics vendor that you might know, bulk powder vendor or vendors that sell capsules together in bottles. You could also get Uridine Monophosphate in bulk powder on the web on Amazon, and or individual capsules on Amazon.com, from various vendors. Just read the reviews. Finding Uridine in a local vitamin shop or something is probably possible. I've seen it in a few that are legit specialized vitamin shops where that's all it is. You go in there and they've got everything from betaine HCl to echinacea. And I've seen Uridine in those places, but you won't find Uridine in GNC as far as I can tell. I don't think you'll find Uridine in the vitamin section of your grocery store. You've got to go to places that are pretty exclusively devoted to vitamins and nutrients, like a supplement store. What does Uridine stack well with? First of all, CDP choline, absolutely. So, I was somewhere in the range of 100 to 200 milligrams of Uridine with somewhere between 70 and 200 milligrams of CDP choline. And then, of course, titrate up if you get no response from that. But that's where you would start. That's probably one of the best combinations out there for getting verbal fluency and functionality, mental energy and endurance together, and working memory. I mean, it's a really a wide spectrum of positive effects from the combination there. But I found that Uridine also stacks well with Alcar, acetyl L-carnitine. That's probably partially because Alcar donates one of the enzymes within the process of the production of acetylcholine, and Uridine works on acetylcholine also. So it stacks well with Alcar. It stacks well with very low dose artichoke extract. That's one of the things that we put in the Cortex stacks. We felt that it onsetted the stack, and everybody reported that it onsetted the stack faster when the artichoke extract was there. We've got our theories about why that might happen, but the mechanisms don't seem to be studied anywhere. It's like no one actually sat down and tried to study that. But I'd say probably the most profound combination of things to stack with Uridine that is well reported on is B vitamins, a choline source, and DHA. So the story behind that is that in order for the brain to engage in cellular repair as well as neurogenesis, it needs a couple things, and they all work synergistically together to get the best outcome. Some of them can facilitate those processes like cellular repair and neurogenesis by themselves, but they work a hell of a lot better when they're connected, when they're sort of taken at the same time, and that would be Uridine, B9, B6, and B12. B9 is particularly important for cellular repair and regeneration. A choline source, so that could be alpha GPC, CDP choline, or something like choline bartartrate. And then docosahexaenoic acid, the fatty acid in fish oil that is both most prevalent in the human brain and is, for a lot of people, the most noticeable of the two, that and icosapentaenoic acid, which is EPA, the other omega-3 fatty acid. This is not the type of nootropic compound to take with anything like modafinil. I think you probably want to limit modafinil to be taken by itself unless you're adding theanine to calm down the nervous system from the extra stimulatory effects. Some people take modafinil, get panic attacks, so that you might want to be taking theanine for that. But you wouldn't want to mix Uridine with modafinil. As far as mixing Uridine with any of the racetams, I've had some good results mixing the Cortex stack with aniracetams, so it's not far-fetched that might work well for you, either the Cortex stack with aniracetam or Uridine monophosphate by itself with a racetam. But once you start getting into combining Uridine with Noopept and combining Uridine with phenylpiracetam and combining Uridine with pramiracetam, then you're going into uncharted waters. That isn't to say that you might not run into a great result, because you might. But it's not something I've ever done, and it's not really on my list of things to try. And perhaps eventually, when I run out of things to try, I run out of things to talk about. But for now, I would approach judiciously if you're going to combine Uridine with anything else, just because we don't have a whole lot of people talking about the effects of Uridine plus a lot of other stuff. It's such a powerful nootropic in and of itself that folks really don't stack it with a whole bunch, besides a choline source, which is very, that's very primary what you stack it with, B vitamins and DHA. So that has been the podcast number 14 on the power of Uridine monophosphate as a nootropic. Again, it's in my top 5. It's in my top 4. It's one of the most powerful nootropic stacks I've ever taken. Hands down, it is the best nootropic stack, nootropic compound for verbal fluency. That's it. Forget it. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that good. The Alcar alpha GPC theanine stack, which we talk about often, which is 300 milligrams Alcar, 75 to 100 milligrams alpha GPC, 120 to 200 milligrams caffeine, and 200 or so milligrams of L-theanine. It's close. It's close and induce, competing in the realm of verbal fluency with uridine monophosphate and or uridine with CDP choline, but it's not quite there. It's that is the standout effect we get, because our YouTube channel now is 2,200 subscribers or something, and a lot of those folks buy the Cortex stack. We get review after review after review, email after email. Man, I was giving a speech. I can't believe it. I'm so verbally fluent. Never felt like this in my life. Right? This is the nootropic for verbal fluency. So it's for sure uridine monophosphate up in there doing that. So that's one of the most standout effects that I would say that folks get with it. Oh, one last thing. I would say with uridine, and just like most of the things that we talk about in the realm of nootropics or neurochemical modulation, I think that uridine should be cycled. Uridine should absolutely be cycled. We just don't know. I think we have at least some studies on examine.com, and if you hunt for them, you can find studies of people taking uridine consistently and not running into any difficulties. But again, this is I think the stronger the nootropic, the more you want to cycle. Like modafinil. I would not take modafinil for any more than 50 or 60 days. I did a 40-day stint with it, and I was totally great, because I had fixed my problems with responding negatively to it before by adding 5-HTP for, just about a month in pretty high doses and fixing what seemed to be a serotonin deficiency. I was getting kind of panicky symptoms with it. So the stronger the compound, the more you want to cycle it. So probably a good cycle strategy for uridine would be something like a month on, a week off, then a month on, 2 weeks off, and then, a month or two on, and then perhaps a whole month off. You kind of want to follow a similar cycle strategy to that, because again, one of the things that we know happens with neurotransmitter modulation and neurochemical receptor modulation is downregulation, which is where the signal strength, the brain tries to just get back to homeostasis, and the signal strength to that particular neurotransmitter receptor specifically starts to decrease to try to take the brain back to normal, and you start being less responsive to the nootropic compounds. You don't want that to happen. Essentially, you start developing a little bit of a resistance to it or a tolerance. If you don't want that to happen, then I would suggest cycling. I've actually never run into a tolerance with uridine monophosphate. It only seems to actually intensify. I take less of it over time, but I guess it's just something that we kind of like to put out as a caveat when talking about everything. But either way, absolutely something you should cycle, just like everything else. And that is it, my friends. You heard us talking about the Cortex Nootropic stack. Right now, the Cortex stack is $34.99. We've got a considerable amount of bottles left on the first batch there. So secure a bottle at livecortex.com. This stack is being used by everybody all around the world, from Wall Street executives to business executives to people that give speeches for a living because of the influence on verbal fluency that it has for them. To moms in Canada, to single moms dealing with 5 kids that need energy past 5 p.m. and nothing gives it to them, so they start taking Cortex, and that's it. They're up, they're functional, and their brain is working good until midnight, to basically everybody else in between, and particularly nootropics experimenters. Now, a lot of nootropics experimenters are gung-ho about hating on pre-made stacks, and that's totally fine, because you can go buy the ingredients yourself, and it is certainly going to be a lot cheaper. But we put it together. We did a beta testing protocol. We back it. It's all professionally made. That there's value in that. So secure a bottle at livecortex.com of what's being called the only pre-made nootropic stack that works. Thanks so much for listening. Check us out on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, the Cortex Nootropics and Smart Drugs YouTube channel, on the web at livecortex.com. Our blog is livecortex.com/blog, where we're trying to make the most comprehensive smart drugs, nootropics, and biohacking and performance enhancement blog on the planet. We've got a lot of great content on livecortex.com/blog. And then also on Twitter and Facebook at twitter.com/cortexstacks, and on Facebook at the same. It's facebook.com/cortexstacks. Pick up a bottle of the Cortex Nootropic at www.livecortex.com.